For centuries, the Mughals ruled India with unmatched power, but from the heart of the Deccan Plateau, a new force was rising. The Marathas. This is the story of rebellion, war, and destiny, of how one empire fell and another rose from its ashes. In 1658, the throne of the Mughal Empire was once again stained with blood. Aurangzeb, son of Shah Jahan, the very emperor who had erected the Taj Mahal as a symbol of love and power, declared himself the sovereign after imprisoning his father and executing his own brother. Dara Shikoh. The architectural splendor of the Mughals then gave way to the rigidity of iron and faith. Aurangzeb was a ruthless warrior. He was convinced that his mission was not just to preserve an empire, but to extend it to the furthest reaches of the Indian subcontinent. Under a strict Islamic orthodoxy, during his early years, Mughal dominion reached unprecedented dimensions, stretching from Kashmir to the Deccan Plateau and from Kabul to Bengal. But this excessive expansion began to erode the empire's foundations. The endless wars drained the treasury, and the army became a tired giant. As the coffers emptied, Aurangzeb's religious decrees grew harsher. The reintroduction of the jizya tax on Hindus, the demolition of temples, and the marginalization of non-Muslim officials fueled a resentment that spread like wildfire through dry brush. In the hills of the west, amidst jungles and treacherous gorges, this resentment took shape. There, in the Deccan region, a resistance was born that would forever change the fate of the empire. The Marathas were peasants, horsemen, mercenaries, and villagers of Marathi tongue, accustomed to surviving among rugged mountains and endless monsoons. Among them rose a young man of the Bhosle clan, Shivaji. Unlike the princes of Delhi, Shivaji possessed neither war elephants nor marble palaces. He had something more valuable, an idea. He believed that the land belonged to those who worked it, and knew it, not to the rulers of the north. From the age of 15, he began to gather men, restore abandoned fortresses, and establish a network of hideouts in the Sahyadri Mountains. Each fortress, Torna, Raigad, Sinagad, became a seed of rebellion. His warriors were farmers, armed with spears, and an unshakable faith. Instead of large armies, they relied on a light, fast, and silent cavalry, capable of disappearing among the cliffs and reappearing where the enemy least expected it. Shivaji's initial success alarmed Aurangzeb, who sent against him the Rajput general Jai Singh, famous as much for his sword as for his diplomacy. The siege of Purandar Fort in 1665 was one of the most brutal episodes of the early war. For weeks, the Mughals bombarded the walls with Persian artillery brought from the north, while the outnumbered Marathas launched desperate night raids. The Maratha commander Murabaji Deshpande fell in a suicidal charge that destroyed several enemy positions before he was killed. His death convinced Shivaji that resistance would be a collective suicide. He chose to negotiate. The Treaty of Purandar forced the Marathas to surrender more than 20 forts and send Shivaji's son Sambhaji to the court of Delhi as a hostage. However, the apparent defeat was a calculated move. Shivaji conceded territory to buy time. He retained the most inaccessible strongholds and waited for an opportunity to regain the initiative. Aurangzeb believed he had crushed the rebellion, but he had only lit the fuse of a war that would spread for generations. Months later, Shivaji travelled to the imperial court, expecting official recognition. There, he was humiliated, placed among the lower ranks, and watched day and night. His response was one of the most legendary escapes in Indian history. Feigning illness, he asked to send baskets of sweets and fruits as offerings to the temples. In one of them, hidden alongside his son, he left Agra and disappeared into the crowd. Aurangzeb, furious, ordered his capture, but Shivaji was already back in the mountains of the Deccan. His escape not only ridiculed the Mughal court, but it also turned Shivaji into a symbol of Hindu pride and a living myth among the peoples of the south. When Shivaji returned from his daring escape, the Mughal Empire was beginning to crumble. The wars in the south were devouring the treasury and weakening loyalties. Aurangzeb, obsessed with subduing the Deccan, sent increasingly large armies. But the fire of resistance had been ignited. From the Sahyadri Mountains, Shivaji transformed a rebellion into a nation. His army was not large, but it was invisible. Small units of horsemen and armed farmers moved along secret trails, communicating by smoke signals. Each Maratha fortress, Rajgad, Sinhagad, functioned as a piece of a defensive network that could withstand months of siege. If one fort fell, another counterattacked from the rear. It was a war of attrition based on mobility, cunning, and knowledge of the terrain. In 1670, the assault on Sinhagad Fort marked the turning point. The commander Tanaji Malusare, a friend of Shivaji, scaled the cliffs with 500 men during the night. The battle was fierce, hand to hand, amidst darkness and torches. Tanaji fell, but his men took the fort. Upon hearing the news, Shivaji murmured a phrase that would become eternal. "We have regained Sinhagad, but we have lost our lion." With that victory, resistance transformed into sovereignty. In a few years, Shivaji dominated the entire western strip of the Deccan, from Pune to the Konkan coast. He created an efficient administrative system with tax collectors, local judges, and a small navy that guarded trade routes. For the first time since the ancient kingdoms, an indigenous power ruled without depending on Delhi. In 1674, he was crowned Chhatrapati, Lord of the Parasol, in Raigad. The ceremony, officiated by scholars from Benares, was a political proclamation, the birth of Swarajya, self-governance. His kingdom was not based on conquest, but on moral duty, dharma, and the protection of his people. Unlike Aurangzeb, Shivaji respected the Muslim communities under his rule and punished religious abuses. He was a pragmatic leader, understanding that strength without justice cannot sustain an empire. Between 1675 and 1680, he launched campaigns to the south, conquering Jinji and Vellore, key positions in Tamil Nadu. His network of fortresses and his fleet in the Arabian Sea consolidated his independence. However, constant movement, illness, and Mughal pressure deteriorated his health. Shivaji died in 1680, leaving a solid state and an immortal idea. India could govern itself. His son Sambhaji inherited the throne, but lacked the political genius of his father. Aurangzeb, already old, descended to the south, determined to destroy the Maratha legacy. For more than 20 years, he led exhausting campaigns, besieging fortress after fortress. Sambhaji was captured in 1689 and executed, a fact documented even by Mughal chroniclers who praised his courage. But the death of the king did not mean the end. The Marathas dispersed into guerrillas who strangled imperial lines, attacking convoys and destroying Mughal morale. Aurangzeb died in 1707, old and defeated, leaving an empty and exhausted empire. From those ruins, a new order was born. Without an absolute king, the Marathas created a confederation governed by a Peshwa, a prime minister with total power. The first, Balaji Vishwanath, reorganized the military and financial system. His son, Baji Rao Wets, would carry that energy beyond the Deccan to the very heart of the north. While the Mughals consumed themselves in their own splendor, the Marathas prepared to mount the horses that would gallop over the ruins of the old empire. After Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal throne became a power vacuum. Emperors were still crowned, but they no longer ruled. While silence reigned in Delhi, a new authority emerged from Pune. The Peshwas, under Baji Rao Wai, son of Balaji Vishwanath. The Marathas abandoned defense to initiate a lightning offensive that would transform the map of India. His army was fast, light, and disciplined. Without elephants or heavy artillery, it advanced more than 60 miles a day, striking and disappearing before being detected. Baji Rao did not conquer fortresses. He isolated them. In the Battle of Palkhed in 1728, he surrounded the Nizam of Hyderabad, cutting off water and supplies until he forced him to surrender. A model of mobile warfare that the British would study centuries later. 10 years later, his horsemen reached the gates of Delhi. The Emperor Muhammad Shah, powerless, asked the Nizam for help. But when reinforcements arrived, Bajirao had already vanished. The Treaty of Bhopal in 1738 confirmed the inevitable. Royal authority passed to Pune. The Mughal Empire survived only as a ceremony. Under his son Balaji Bajirao, the expansion continued. The Marathas extended their dominion from Gujarat and Orissa, and from the Carnatic to the Punjab. Never before, since the times of Ashoka, had an indigenous power controlled so much territory, but ambition led them too far. In the north, the Afghan Ahmad Shah Durrani, founder of the Durrani Empire, invaded India. The final clash came at Panipat on January the 14th, 1761. The Marathas gathered a gigantic army, some 800 soldiers, and thousands of civilians under the command of Sadashivrao Pal. They advanced slowly, laden with provisions, losing the mobility that had made them invincible. Durrani, with 60,000 men, light artillery mounted on camels, and local allies, surrounded them on the plain. When the fighting began, the fire of the Jezzails opened deadly gaps. By sunset, the Maratha army was destroyed. It was one of the greatest tragedies of the 18th century, with tens of thousands dead. According to a rumour collected by chroniclers of the Punjab, without documentary confirmation, Durrani is said to have said upon seeing the field, "I have defeated the Marathas, but I have lost India." And he was right. The Afghans could not govern it, and the Mughals no longer existed. From the ruins of Panipat emerged a new generation. Madhav Rao, son of the defeated Peshwa, rebuilt the state with extraordinary energy, restored the administration, unified the Holkar, Shinde, and Gaikwad clans, and retook Gujarat, Mawa, and Bundelkhand. In 1771, General Mahaji Shinde marched on Delhi, defeated the local lords, and restored Emperor Shah Alam II. But under Maratha protection, from then on, the Mughal throne was merely a symbol. Imperial decrees needed the approval of Pune. In 1795, the Battle of Khada against the Nizam of Hyderabad sealed the end of the old order. The united Marathas imposed their hegemony throughout the Deccan for the first time in centuries. India was ruled by Indians. However, while they celebrated their victory, a new power rose on the horizon, the British East India Company, advancing with disciplined armies and a different logic, that of commerce and armed diplomacy. That's how Mughal rule came to its end. The Marathas did not proclaim themselves emperors, but they were the ones who destroyed the most powerful empire in South Asia. Their story was a lesson written in fire that no throne, however high it may be, can forever resist the people who decide to rise up. If this story about how the Marathas ended Mughal rule gave you a fresh perspective on Indian history, then be sure to subscribe to Imperium Total to keep exploring the wars, empires, and decisions that changed the world. Leave us a comment. Do you think the Marathas' strength lay in their strategy or their faith? Thanks for joining us on this journey to the heart of power and resistance. Back in the year 1658, things took a dark turn for the Mughal Empire, as blood was spilled once again for the throne. Aurangzeb, who was the son of Shah Jahan, the same guy who built the Taj Mahal as a symbol of his love and power, decided he was going to be the new ruler. So he locked up his own father and had his brother, Dara Shikoh, killed. Talk about a family drama. With that, the Mughals' fancy buildings and art took a back seat to some serious military muscle and strict religious rules. Now, Aurangzeb, he was one tough dude. He wasn't just about keeping the empire together. He wanted to make it bigger and better, spreading his strict version of Islam all over the Indian subcontinent. For a while, things went his way, and the Mughal Empire stretched farther than ever before, from Kashmir all the way down to the Deccan Plateau, and from Kabul over to Bengal. But, like they say, too much of anything is never good. And this massive growth started to cause problems. All those endless wars started to drain the empire's money, and the army was getting tired of fighting all the time. As the empire got poorer, Aurangzeb started cracking down with even stricter religious rules. He brought back this old tax on Hindus, started tearing down temples, and pushed non-Muslims out of important jobs. People were not happy, and this anger spread like crazy out in the western hills, hidden in jungles and hard-to-reach places. This anger started to turn into something else. A resistance movement was brewing in the Deccan region, and it was about to change everything for the empire. The Marathas, they were mostly farmers, horse riders, and some regular folks who spoke Marathi and knew how to survive in the tough mountains and during the crazy monsoon seasons. And then there was this young guy named Shivaji from the Bhosle clan. Unlike the fancy princes in Delhi, Shivaji didn't have elephants or fancy palaces. What he had was something even more powerful, an idea. He believed that the land belonged to the people who worked it and knew it, not some rulers from up north. Starting at just 15 years old, Shivaji began gathering men, fixing up old forts, and building secret hideouts in the Sahyadri mountains. Each fort, like Torna, Rajgarh, and Sinagad, became a place where the seeds of rebellion could grow. His fighters were mostly farmers, armed with spears, and a whole lot of determination. Instead of relying on huge armies, they used fast, quiet horse riders who could disappear into the hills and pop up where the enemy least expected them. When Aurangzeb heard about Shivaji's early successes, he got worried and sent his top general, Jai Singh, after him. Jai Singh was a Rajput known for being a great fighter and a smooth talker. The siege of Purandar Fort in 1665 was one of the worst fights early on. The Mughals spent weeks blasting the fort walls with cannons they brought all the way from Persia. Meanwhile, the Marathas, who were outnumbered, launched these crazy night raids to try and even the odds. The Maratha commander, Murabaji Deshpande, died in a suicide charge that took out a bunch of enemy positions before he was killed. His death made Shivaji realize that fighting to the end would mean everyone would die. So he decided to negotiate. The Treaty of Purandar made the Marathas give up more than 20 forts and send Shivaji's son, Sambhaji, to Delhi as a hostage. But this wasn't really a defeat for Shivaji. It was a smart move. He gave up some land to buy himself some time. He kept the forts that were hardest to reach and waited for the right moment to strike back. Aurangzeb thought he had crushed the rebellion, but he had really just lit the fuse for a long, drawn-out war. A few months later, Shivaji went to the Mughal court, hoping to get some respect. Instead, he was treated like dirt, put in the back of the room, and watched around the clock. So he pulled off one of the most famous escapes in Indian history. He pretended to be sick and asked to send baskets of sweets and fruits to the temples as offerings. He hid himself and his son in one of those baskets, left Agra, and vanished into the crowd. Aurangzeb was furious and ordered everyone to find him, but Shivaji was already back in the mountains of the Deccan. This escape didn't just make the Mughal court look silly. It turned Shivaji into a hero for Hindus and a living legend in the south. By the time Shivaji got back from his escape, the Mughal Empire was starting to fall apart. The wars down south were costing a ton of money, and people were starting to lose their loyalty. Aurangzeb was obsessed with taking over the Deccan, so he kept sending more and more troops. But the Marathas' resistance was only getting stronger. From his base in the Sahyadri mountains, Shivaji turned a small rebellion into a nation. His army wasn't huge, but it was like a ghost. Small groups of horsemen and armed farmers moved along secret paths, sending messages with smoke signals. Each Maratha fort, like Rajgarh and Sinagad, was part of a network that could hold out for months under siege. If one fort fell, another would attack from behind. It was a war of wearing the enemy down, using speed, smarts, and knowing the land. In 1670, the attack on Sinagad Fort was a major turning point. A commander named Tanaji Malusari, who was a close friend of Shivaji, climbed up the cliffs with 500 men in the middle of the night. The battle was intense, fought hand-to-hand in the dark with only torches to see by. Tanaji died, but his men captured the fort. When Shivaji heard the news, he said, "We have won Sinhagad, but we have lost our lion." With that victory, the Marathas weren't just resisting anymore. They were becoming their own power. Within a few years, Shivaji controlled the entire western part of the Deccan, from Pune to the Konkan coast. He set up a good system of government with tax collectors, judges, and even a small navy to protect the trade routes. For the first time since the Old Kingdoms, an Indian power was ruling without having to answer to Delhi. In 1674, he was crowned Chhatrapati, which means Lord of the Parasol. In Raigad, the ceremony was performed by scholars from Benares and was a big statement, the birth of Swarajya, or self-rule. His kingdom wasn't about conquering, it was about doing what was right, following Dharma, and protecting his people. Unlike Aurangzeb, Shivaji respected the Muslim communities under his rule and punished anyone who abused religion. He was practical and understood that power without fairness can't hold an empire together. Between 1675 and 1680, he launched campaigns to the south, capturing Jinji and Velwara, which were important spots in Tamil Nadu. His network of forts and his navy in the Arabian Sea made his independence secure. However, all the constant moving, the illnesses, and the pressure from the Mughals started to take a toll on his health. Shivaji died in 1680, leaving behind a strong state and a powerful idea that India could rule itself. His son, Sambhaji, took over, but he didn't have his father's political skills. Aurangzeb, now old, came down to the south, determined to wipe out everything Shivaji had built. For more than 20 years, he led tough campaigns, attacking fort after fort. Sambhaji was captured in 1689 and killed, which even the Mughal writers admired his courage. But Sambhaji's death didn't end things. The Marathas broke up into smaller groups and harassed the Mughal army, attacking their supplies and lowering their morale. Aurangzeb died in 1707, old and defeated, leaving behind an empire that was empty and worn out. From those ruins, a new order appeared. Without a king, the Marathas formed a confederation ruled by a Peshwa, which was like a prime minister with all the power. The first one, Balaji Vishwanath, reorganized the army and the financial system. His son, Baji Rao, took things even further, pushing beyond the Deccan and into the heart of the north. While the Mughals were caught up in their own fancy lives, the Marathas were getting ready to ride their horses over the ruins of the old empire. After Aurangzeb died, the Mughal throne was basically empty. There were still emperors, but they weren't really in charge anymore. While Delhi was quiet, a new power was rising in Pune, the Peshwas, under Baji Rao, son of Balaji Vishwanath. The Marathas stopped defending and started attacking, changing the map of India. His army was fast, light, and well organized. Without elephants or big cannons, they could move over 60 miles a day, striking and disappearing before anyone knew what was happening. Baji Rao didn't bother conquering forts, he just cut them off. In the Battle of Palkhed in 1728, he surrounded the Nizam of Hyderabad, cutting off his water and supplies until he had to surrender. This was a new kind of warfare that the British would study later on. 10 years later, his horsemen reached the gates of Delhi. The emperor, Muhammad Shah, was helpless and asked the Nizam for help. But by the time the reinforcements arrived, Baji Rao was gone. The Treaty of Bhopal in 1738 made it official. The real power was now in Pune. The Mughal Empire was just a show under his son, Balaji Baji Rao. The Marathas kept expanding. They controlled land from Gujarat to Orissa and from the Carnatic to the Punjab. Not since the time of Ashoka had an Indian power controlled so much territory, but their ambition led them too far. In the north, Ahmad Shah Durrani, the Afghan founder of the Durrani Empire, invaded India. The final battle was at Panipat on January the 14th. 1761, the Marathas gathered a huge army, 70,000 soldiers and thousands of regular people under the command of Sadashivrao Pal. They moved slowly, carrying tons of supplies, and lost the speed that had made them so successful. Durrani, with 60,000 men, light cannons mounted on camels, and local allies, surrounded them on the plain. When the fighting started, the Afghan guns tore through the Maratha lines. By the end of the day, the Maratha army was destroyed. It was one of the worst disasters of the 18th century, with tens of thousands dead. According to a story from the Punjab, Durrani supposedly said when he saw the battlefield, "I have defeated the Marathas, but I have lost India." And he was right. The Afghans couldn't rule it, and the Mughals were finished. From the ruins of Panipat, a new generation emerged. Madhavrao, son of the defeated Peshwa, rebuilt the state with amazing energy. He fixed the government, united the Holkar, Shinde, and Gaikwad clans, and took back Gujarat, Malwa, and Bundelkhand. In 1771, General Mahaji Shinde marched on Delhi, defeated the local lords, and put Emperor Shah Alam II back on the throne. But under Maratha protection, from that point on, the Mughal throne was just a symbol. The Marathas had to approve all the emperor's decisions. In 1795, the Battle of Khada against the Nizam of Hyderabad sealed the end of the old order. The Marathas were united and had control over the entire Deccan. For the first time in centuries, India was ruled by Indians. However, as they were celebrating their victory, a new power was appearing on the horizon. The British East India Company, with its well-organized armies and a different way of thinking, based on trade and armed diplomacy. That's how the Mughal rule ended. The Marathas never called themselves emperors, but they were the ones who destroyed the most powerful empire in South Asia. Their story is a lesson that no matter how high a throne is, it can't stand forever against the people who decide to rise up. If you enjoyed this story about how the Marathas ended Mughal rule, and it gave you a new way to look at Indian history, then make sure to subscribe to Imperium Total to keep exploring the wars, empires, and decisions that changed the world. Leave a comment and let us know if you think the Marathas were successful because of their strategy or their faith. Thanks for joining us on this journey into power and resistance.